Well, if you have ever loved somebody who was suffering, you know that there is almost nothing that you wouldn't do to help them. You would make every phone call, try every treatment, endure every kind of awkward or humiliation situation if it meant you could bring them relief. Sure, we've all known that kind of deep hurt and yearning within us. And that is the raw human heart of this story from Matthew chapter 15. A Canaanite woman, a mother, an outsider in almost every sense of the word, has a daughter who is gravely ill. Having likely exhausted every other possible option, she risks everything to approach a foreign Jewish teacher named Jesus. She doesn't have a belonging to that community. She doesn't have a prestigious title. She doesn't have the right background. All she has is love for her child and a conviction that Jesus has the power to heal. Today, as we look at an encounter that tests our assumptions about who is welcome, about who is excluded, and how we handle divine silence, we discover a woman who realized something profound, that even the smallest bit of God's grace is more than enough. Today, we're looking at crumbs from an overflowing table. Our gospel passage today has a woman front and centre, not though perhaps as many of us might wish to see her. Jesus and his disciples have travelled outside of Galilee to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Jesus, before this, had been caught up in heated arguments with religious leaders. So it's no surprise, perhaps, that he headed towards the coast. He was looking for a break from the tension, time to lay back, relax, be at ease. And given that Jesus is outside the traditional boundaries of Galilee, we shouldn't be shocked that he encounters a Gentile woman, a non-Jewish Canaanite. What is surprising, though, is that this woman seems to have heard of Jesus. News has spread about who he is and what he's been doing. Why else would she approach him with her request? And it's easy for us, standing where we are in the context that we live in, to underestimate just how daring a thing it was that this woman did. Picture the scene. Jesus and his followers are sharing a meal. It's a moment of respite. A quiet table of friends sharing bread and lamb, enjoying fellowship, speaking, relaxing, being in one another's company, away from all those crowds that had been with them. And then a foreign woman, entirely on her own, steps across the boundary into their space. She is so desperate for her child that she is willing to risk public humiliation, social rejection, and the hostility of foreign men just to get near to Jesus. Her bravery shouldn't be underestimated. She's heard of this Jewish prophet who is doing extraordinary things, healing the sick, casting out demons, feeding huge crowds. She does her research. In fact, her words reveal that she understands who Jesus is better than the religious elite who have been criticizing him. And with great courage, she approaches. She cries out for help. But she's not met with immediate warmth or compassion, that what we might expect Jesus to offer to her. In fact, at first, there's no response at all, just silence. She continues to plead, and the disciples grow annoyed. "Send her away," they urge Jesus. "She keeps crying out after us." It's almost identical to what the disciples had said just one chapter earlier when 5,000 hungry people filled a hillside. On that occasion, Jesus told the disciples to feed the people, performing a staggering miracle of provision. Do you remember what was left over? 12 baskets of broken pieces, far more than crumbs from a table. Yet here, just a chapter later, the disciples are right back to their mindset of scarcity. They act as though God's mercy is a limited commodity, that it has to be rationed, saved for the right people. And then we have Jesus' reply. It's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. It's not a comfortable thing to read or to hear, is it? And it shouldn't be. This mother is ignored and then called a dog. We don't even get to know her name. And we are confronted with difficult questions. Who is included and who is excluded? Who is welcome at the table? And who gets to decide that? Who do we ignore or even insult when they come seeking the Lord? Over the years, commentators and scholars have tried to package this interaction up into a neat little box to protect Jesus' reputation or to make it make sense to us. Some say this was simply a test from Jesus that the woman needed to pass. Others suggest that her persistence made Jesus change his mind. Others argue that Jesus was acting out the prejudices of the disciples to expose their bias, using her as an object lesson. If I'm being honest, none of those rationalizations feel very satisfying. They feel like a jigsaw puzzle that's missing a few pieces. Why would Jesus, a man who we know to be full of compassion and care and grace, so cruelly test a woman whose life was already so painful? It's true, Jesus could have been voicing the rigid cultural and racial boundaries of the time so that she could break through them to teach us something. Whatever the case, this story leaves us wrestling. I don't want to smooth over the tension of this text. I think it should make us uneasy. It points out something in ourselves, those places where we put up barriers, where we want to judge who is welcome and who is not, where who can come to the table of the Lord and who we deem to be unworthy. It's an uncomfortable reading. Yet, amidst the discomfort, this Canaanite mother shines as a powerful witness to us in two distinct ways. Firstly, through her persistence, and secondly, through her courageous humility. So firstly, through her persistence, rooted in her knowledge of the abundance of God. Despite being ignored and insulted, this woman refuses to walk away. And why? Because she understands the sheer scale of God's grace better even than those disciples in the room. When Jesus speaks of bread and dogs, she doesn't drop her head in shame. Rather, she turns the metaphor on its head. Yes, Lord, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. She wasn't asking to jump the queue or to take bread from somebody else's plate. She knew that at God's table there is enough for all. There is no shortage. Think about the contrast of her life. What felt like an insurmountable mountain, this mother had a child tormented by a demon, years of suffering, total helplessness. But that was, in comparison to the power of Christ, just a tiny fragment. She was declaring, Lord, your power is so vast, your mercy is so limitless, that the greatest miracle I could ever ask is no more than a crumb from your hand. She knew that a crumb of Christ's authority was bigger than the darkest demon overshadowing her life. I wonder if we have that same persistent faith. When we bring our deepest needs to God and feel like we're being met with silence or circumstances that feel harsh, do we hold on to the conviction that his grace is still infinitely greater than our problems? We can learn from her persistence. We can also learn from her courageous humility. This mother is a striking example of what it means to be humble. And I think we often confuse humility with being passive or weak or letting people walk all over us. But there's nothing weak about this woman. She is a warrior mother fighting for her child. She refuses to let pride hijack her mission. She could have taken offense. She could have called out Jesus' words and entered into theological debate or stormed off in anger, offended at what was said to her. But instead, she stays laser focused on what matters, on the healing of her daughter. She humbles herself, not because she thinks she is worthless, but because she knows where power lies. How often do we allow our personal pride or our easily offended spirits to stand between us and God? How often do we shout and rail at God or walk away? We can learn from this woman what it means to come before the Lord with relentless persistence that is wrapped in profound humility. In the end, Jesus looks at her and declares, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And that very hour, her daughter was healed. There is more than enough grace at God's table, enough for everyone. And we must never be the ones building fences around who gets access and who is deemed worthy to come to Jesus. Today, as we gather around God's table for Holy Communion, some of us may feel like outsiders. Some of us may feel like we don't belong or we are not worthy. Some of us might feel worn out by divine silence or burdened by desperate needs. But be encouraged by this brave, unnamed Canaanite woman. You don't need a flawless background, an elevated status, or a mountain of perfect faith to receive from God today. A single crumb of his mercy is enough to heal our deepest hurts, to forgive our heaviest sins, and to make us whole. And so let us come to the table with humility, meeting God in our need, confident in his abundance. Amen.